Well, for more on this trend, let's bring in James Conley. He's Clinical Professor of Technology at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with a breakdown for us. What is it that's driving China's patent filing surge?
Well, the government has provided significant incentives to what would be the private sector and the private actors in the economy who would be the inventors. And anytime these incentives exist, the actors, the companies, the private companies and/or those that would be investing in the innovations that would materialize themselves in patents, act accordingly. So this is a very good sign. The government wants to grow this infrastructure, and they want to make sure that the Chinese inventive community participates in their budding patent system.
Now, looking at the demographics of the companies that are filing in China, does it tend to be the more established brands or up-and-coming new companies?
Well, it actually is driven largely by sectors. There's a tremendous activity in the technology sector, specifically ZTE and Huawei and these kinds of companies have actually been leading the world for some time in what would be the PCT filings that you mentioned, which would be tracked by the World Intellectual Property Organization you mentioned earlier. So the technology sector in China is one that the government prioritizes. They want to see this have a very strong competitive base globally. So, of course, we see a lot of patents out of that sector.
And how much is China's drive for innovation and increased domestic consumption affecting these filings, not just in terms of the numbers, but also the types of products?
Well, of course, all of the incentives inside China are trying to drive value-added consumption. They're trying to compete on price, but they also want to move up what is the value-added sort of scale of economic significance. So the patents and the trademarks, which are the brand source identifiers, are very important in building the trust amongst the consumers. The consumers like to see brands that they trust, especially Chinese consumers. So the extent that this system exists and can actually strengthen homegrown brands inside China like Xiaomi. We heard about something about them today. So that's going to be good for domestic consumption.
Now, as technology starts to overlap in this space, for example, in the Apple-Xiaomi case, can we expect more collaborations or will we see more of these patent infringement lawsuits?
Well, I think we'll see a combination of both. It depends on how these various companies from inside China interact outside China. I think we're seeing Xiaomi trying to follow a direct sales model outside the rest of the world, whereas, for example, Apple uses a retail example as well as an online sales model. To the extent that these really become competitive and Apple's technology is found inside Xiaomi's device, arguably speaking, there will be confrontations. But there are other places where patents really don't play as much a role, where Xiaomi will have more of a free hand. I think we're seeing some of this with their activity in India.
Let's look at some of the laws governing this space. What sort of regulations are in place or perhaps need to be in place in order to protect Chinese patents and inventions?
Well, you need a good legal infrastructure, Michelle. Specifically, you need courts that will reliably return rulings to patent owners that give the people that invest in patents and/or brands through trademarks trust in the legal system. So we see this already. The government's trying to invest, bringing in outside experts to build up that capacity inside China. That will strengthen the competitive power of the domestic innovator.
Now, looking into the future, we know that tech analysts tend to look at some of the patent filings from Samsung, Apple, Google, and others to see what they're filing for, to try and predict what sort of product launches may be ahead. What are some of the more interesting ones that you're seeing?
Well, we're seeing all sorts of interesting delivery system patents. I like to follow these just because I'm amazed at how goods are distributed to my front doorstep where I live in the United States. And a lot of these patents are about these airborne vehicles that actually deliver packages directly to your house. And they avoid all of what would be the congestion of the roadways and other strictures. So I see a whole wave of technology, it's probably 5 years off, maybe less, that is going to be about actually distribution of goods. And it's going to be these unmanned quad-pod vehicles that are all being described in the patent system today.
Well, let's hope
that's an example.
Let's hope driving in the air will be better than it is on the streets. Thank you so much, James Conley there of Northwestern University.